Hi, everybody. In this PowerPoint, we're going to talk primarily about how you plan a program, but there's a few things in the beginning that I kind of want to get out of the way first. So really, we've discussed before, water conservation and water use efficiency are the same things, but efficiency is a more modern, more current term. And something else you should think about is somebody can be very efficient and still use a lot of water. For example, agriculture, you could have a vineyard on drip irrigation and they'd be very efficient with their water use, but they're still using a lot of water. So one doesn't necessarily mean the other. So primary focus is to reduce demand for water. There's supply side and demand side, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but it's an important thing to remember that supply side is really the more traditional approach to water. It's all about bringing more water to wherever the people are. You would say that this is, engineers think of it this way. They want to build more reservoirs, more dams, more conveyance projects, whereas a conservation person or a water use efficiency person is looking at reducing demand at the locality, at the spot where the water is used. This is actually a really important concept. So there's some other things that go along with water use efficiency. You can do it by reducing loss and just general water waste. And one of the primary goals isn't just saving water, it's deferring capital investments to save your agency money. Capital investments are a huge part of the agency's budget usually. Wells are almost $2 million to put in a well. Treatment plants are far more than that, several million dollars, if not $100 million. So the less water people use is the more you can defer those costs being spent. And sometimes you can defer them permanently. You'll never have to build them. Another way that you should look at conservation is what land management can do to conserve water. You may have noticed recently that new development they all have bioswales or rain gardens or some way to divert stormwater off of the pavement generally and keep it out of the stormwater system. The goal is to keep it on site because these stormwater basins, really what they do is perk water back into the aquifer and they clean it as they go. That's a new land development area, but it's really important and it's only been used for about the last year. But there are other land management practices you can use to conserve water as well. You may also be aware that you can no longer build a new house and put sod in the front yard. People buy houses and the backyard usually has no landscaping, but developers aren't allowed to put sod anymore. And you'll see the formula for that later. But they have to calculate how much water their landscaping is going to use, and it has to be approved before they can go any further with it. I take it back. There's one caveat. They can put sod in a front yard if they use subterranean or underground drip irrigation. It's super expensive, so they tend not to do it. Almost all front yards now in new developments are landscaped with water conservation practices in mind. So what are some of the benefits and costs of residential water conservation? Well, the benefits obviously are water savings, right? And that's real money. But there's also reduced wastewater flows. Now that can be good and can be bad because a wastewater plant is usually built saying there's going to be so many solids per gallons, and that's the way you build your equipment. Now the wastewater is a lot more concentrated, but at this point, the wastewater plants that are in service now seem to be able to manage it, but it's far more concentrated than it used to be. You're going to use less energy and less chemicals when you use less water. And these are costs that have changed a lot and gone up dramatically in the last 10, 15 years. If you have an aquifer, like we talked in supply side, your safe yield is how much water the water master will allow each individual to take out, each entity to take out. So improved safe yield is important. When you improve safe yield, you also improve the reliability of the basin or pumping reliability. The less water you're spreading around on the ground, the less pollution you're going to have. If you envision fertilizing sod or grass, for example, it's inevitable that some of that is going to go into the street, certainly when it's applied, but also when it rains. So you want to reduce pollution because native plants don't require fertilization. And then there are some costs too. So the cost might be device and installation costs. Toilet programs were really big in the 90s and the 2000s, but that wasn't without a cost. But the cost to benefit ratio was pretty good, which is why that's what agencies all did earlier. Change in water use habits is considered a cost. It's very hard to get people's habits to change over time, and you're going to reduce your revenue that's coming into the utility. Revenue reduction means that people might have to pay more for the water and more for the meter fee or service charge. So these are actual costs that you see associated with water conservation. So now we're going to talk about planning a program. Planning a program is probably one of the more important things you will ever do, and it's important to put in the steps ahead of time. When I first started, I didn't know this, so I didn't do it. But now when I do it, the longest parts of planning a program are basically our brainstorming meetings where we go over a lot of the things that we're going to talk about now. Spend your time up front. It's where you can be more creative, flesh out what problems you might have. It's important to do that because you might find that some of the programs you think are a great idea aren't such a great idea in the long run. All programs should be goal-oriented. They all need to be at least somewhat cost-effective, and they need to be practical. You should have some sort of goal in mind. It doesn't necessarily have to be saving water. It could be changing behavior. It could be setting a standard. Cost-effectiveness is very relative. Everyone's in love with turf replacement programs. I like them myself. But that's not really that cost-effective a program considering the cost to replace turf. What was really cost-effective was toilet replacement. It's just that we've done all of those. So now we have to do something else that's less cost-effective. And is it practical? Again, toilets were very practical. You were in, you were out. There was a lot of work that went along with these programs, and they were done on very large scale. They were very, very practical for the person working in the agency. Turf replacement is a little bit more difficult. I recommend that you have a do-it-yourself program. You don't ever want to do, if you can avoid it, one where you go out and you actually do landscape design for folks, you redo their landscapes for them, and they pay you, even if it's funded from an outside agency and you get a grant for it, because it's a really difficult program to administer. It has to be practical. One of the goals in my group, and this sounds terrible, is are we creating a program that just creates more work for us, or does it really mean something? Our number one mission is to not just create more work. And you must think about how much help you have. If you're a single man shop, you cannot, without making yourself crazy, do a lot of these programs. Can you borrow help? Can you get grant funding to get some help? Programs are always far more labor intensive than you think, and something's going to go wrong. You need to be prepared for that. So when somebody at your agency tells you, oh, well, why don't we do this or why don't we do that? You can honestly say, but we don't have that help. You need staff. So ideally, they're cost effective and the public accepts them. Understand that there might be a facility impact. Most of the programs I do don't impact a facility because I'm not Metropolitan Water District. I have a little over, I think about 135,000 customers, about 33,000 accounts. I'd have to have 100% participation to impact a facility. But it might affect rates if you're super successful, especially where do you fund your rebates from. And it can, in large scale, affect the environmental system. So An example is turf replacement. You have turf in 10 people's front yards, and you get them all 10 to change out to native plants. You're going to affect the environmental system. Now, is it a positive effect? Yes, it is. You're going to attract native birds, native bees, but it's still an impact. That's where, and actually you could sell it on that. Here we're improving the environment. Most agencies want to be viewed as environmentally friendly and sustainable. So think about all of these things when you're planning your program. Okay, there's different things. There's measures, and then these are measures. We're going to go on to the next slide. Sorry. So you need two kinds of measures. You need hardware and behavior. This is kind of an important concept. I want you to go over this slide and the next slide more than once. So hardware is very self-explanatory, but behavior is a little bit harder to change. So going back to the landscape issue, if you put in a native plant garden, you're going to have a lot less frequent watering. Ultimately, you're only going to water if you have an extremely long, dry winter. You're not going to water at all in the summer because native plants don't like water in the summer. But that's a behavioral change. Washing only full loads of laundry, it's a behavioral change. Adjusting irrigation systems for the seasonal use, that is a behavioral change. So these two components, hardware and behavior, are called measures. Okay? You want to drive measures with incentives. Okay? Incentives are what make people do something. And there's three different types of incentives: education, financial, and regulatory. So let's start with education. These are only two samples: how you format your bill and workshops. What your bill says on it can actually drive people to do conservation measures. For example, if you measure your water not in units but in gallons, so a customer knows how many gallons they use, it will drive them, it's an incentive for them to try to conserve water. Most people want to do the right thing. It's called social norming. Workshops are another variety of incentive. You can have a workshop and teach people through educational processes to then take advantage of the measures. Nothing works better than cold, hard cash. And that can come in the form of rebates, where you apply for a rebate and then you get a check back, or a bill credit. Now, here in Riverside, I live in an area where they have a bill credit system. So I applied for a rebate thinking I was going to get a check from like Metropolitan. What in fact I got was a bill credit on my bill. But hey, that was pretty nice. I liked it. Any sort of financial incentive is going to work. And then there are regulatory incentives. And this is where people don't have much choice. When I talked about the fact that developers can't put turf in front yards anymore, that's a regulatory incentive. It's an actual ordinance. It's a state of California law that everybody had to adopt a landscape plan or code. And plumbing codes are a big part of that too. Plumbing codes, I think, are re-established every couple of years. And then there are changes made. That's how part of the way that shower heads were changed, how much water they flow, toilets were changed. So plumbing codes are very critical as an incentive, but they also have to be very, very well thought out because of the building industry. Goodness, there we go. So let me see what happened here. Sorry about that. This is the next slide we need. So step one, you want to identify your goals. You want to have a long conversation with the people you're working with or by yourself about what your goals are. Is it to save water? Is it to change behavior? Maybe both. And then you want to establish a time frame, okay? And always double it. If you think it's going to take you 6 months, give it a year. Always, always double it. Are you going to need capital expenditures? And if so, where are you going to get the money from? Are you going to reduce operating costs? Is that part of your goal? Are you reducing energy consumption? That alone can help you get a grant. Are you within regulatory compliance guidelines? Are you attempting to increase community involvement? Having a workshop is a great example of that. You're increasing community involvement. And are you boosting public confidence? Are you helping customers think that your agency knows what they're doing, and you're giving a clear message that this is a great program? You want to really think out these goals. Now, you might not have everything on this. You might just say, okay, I'm going to establish my goal. Here's my time frame. I don't need outside funding. I can do it with my own budget. That's good enough. But look at these other things, especially if you're going to apply for a grant. Step 2. Ultimately, you need to develop a profile. Now, in our case, we're 100% groundwater. So no matter what, our water supply source is groundwater. Is this going to affect your production? And it's a good idea to look back at prior programs and see if they worked. We were involved in a regional program. We really thought it was going to be great. We started it. And you know what? It just wasn't successful, and it was way too much work. We literally dropped out of the program, and we've never done it again. So take a look if you have something to measure against, and do that. Ideally, if you're in a large agency, you're going to see if this is going to affect your future water demand. More often than not, it is not going to affect your demand significantly. But if you have a pretty good program, you might save a few hundred acre-feet of water. If you're saving a few hundred acre-feet of water, that's going to affect your future water demand. So take a look, see who your typical customer is, and develop a water use profile for them and historical usage. This will help you set your goals too. So for example, if you're targeting residential customers, say a normal family, in our area, that's about 35 units a month. I know from census data that my average family is about 4.5 people. They use about 35 units a month. This helps me extrapolate how much water I can actually really save by either installing a new toilet or doing turf removal. Evaluate unaccounted for water. Understand that just because you know, for example, that turf replacement saves 44 gallons per square foot for a year, there's going to be some unaccounted for water that's just wasted you're never going to account for. So build in a little percentage, plus or minus 2%. And don't be afraid to make revisions along the way. Your whole goal at some point should be to boost the confidence of the decision maker. And that would probably be your boss, your boss's boss, and ultimately your board or council. They want to know that when you get to them to propose a program, that you know what you're talking about. So know it from every angle you can. And usually they'll just go along with it. Step 3. This is not something I often have to do because, again, I don't work in a large agency. But you should look at if any facilities are planned, and if they are, what impact your program might have on them. More often than not, it's not going to make any difference. It's not that your programs aren't great, but the agencies you're working in are using so much water, it's just a drop in the bucket. But it is something to think about if you're in a larger agency or doing a very large scale program. So you do at some point want to identify and evaluate your conservation measures, like what really saves water. For example, is it turf replacement? Is it toilet replacement? Is it events, education at events? You can make a matrix on Excel and kind of make your options up. You can do a grading scale. So you can evaluate these measures in terms of possible water savings. You can get a lot of this information from the Alliance for Water Efficiency, from Metropolitan's website also. I'm trying to think, from CalWEP. They also have some studies published. That's a really important thing. Long-term studies have done that it let you know exactly how much water is saved by each appliance. So this is one of the ways you can make a cost projection. Then assess your market saturation. And the reason I'm saying this is because you don't want to do a huge scale toilet program if your market is already saturated with 90%. You want to do something else. And then identify short or long-term measures that may become problematic. Are there unintended consequences to what you're doing? The program I told you that we dropped, it was a turf replacement program that we were doing with another regional partner. And what we discovered was that there were some areas where the neighbors really hated it, and they kind of ostracized the people who did it. Now, eventually, it all worked out fine, but that was something we just never anticipated. So try and spend some time thinking of every worst possible case scenario. Okay, bear with me. We're almost done. Identify and assess your conservation incentives. Motivation really counts. If you're in an area where people really want to do the right thing, maybe they're early adopters, that motivation will carry you a long way. But do ask yourself at some point, what causes resistance to this program? Is it time? Is it money? What could possibly make people not want to do it? Because if they really don't want to do it, you don't want to spend your time trying to convince them to do it, even though they don't want to. Okay, you want to find something people can buy into pretty easily. Step 6. This is, for me, one of the better parts of this because you can estimate your savings, your benefits, and your costs. I guess I would start with costs. How much is it going to cost me to get a toilet? How much do I have to pay a plumber to install it? Does the customer self-install it? Again, I told you where you can get information on how much water you'll actually save from turf replacement, toilet replacement, etc. From there, you can estimate your benefits and you can determine the cost effectiveness. I would put this on the matrix, and then that'll help you make your decision about what's really going to be beneficial for your agency. And you do need to compare the net implementation costs of all of these programs. And then I think you should also add in the aggravation factor. Talk to your colleagues if you're new, and if they tell you a particular problem or program was very difficult to implement, let's say toilets or shower heads, you can assign it an aggravation factor of 10, all right? And yet you know that another program is really easy, like giving away hose nozzles to people, the things that go at the end of the hose. That's easy. That saves a lot of water, and the aggravation factor is 1. So it'll help you determine, those are extreme examples, but it'll help you determine which way you want to go. So you're going to take your matrix and you're going to identify the quantitative and qualitative criteria, and you're going to rank them, and then you're going to justify them. Now, you're not going to justify them in that you really want to do a particular program. You're going to, what you've done by creating a matrix is you really know what's going to work for you better than anything else. But I put at the bottom, never underestimate your gut. If you feel like a program is just not worth it, it's just going to be too much, and you're really not super motivated, drop it. I should have dropped that other program I told you about. I didn't. Even though I knew it was going to be difficult. I should have dropped it, and I didn't. So trust your gut. That's the worst of it. Okay, once you get to step 8, you've gone through the worst. You've evaluated, you've set goals, you've got cost, you know, cost effectiveness. Now you can actually prepare a plan. I think a timeline is a really effective way to prepare a plan. And I use timelines a lot. I'll say, okay, it's going to start on this date. I want to be here by this date. And then I usually add built-in time for things to go wrong. Sometimes I double the time if it's a complex program. And then you should add an evaluation period too, but don't sell it as a short program and then have to go back and say, and I've done this, say, oh, I goofed this up, I need more time. Give yourself way, way more time than you think. Most of our programs aren't going to have rate problems, but there are some issues, and we'll talk about it in the rate PowerPoint, what you can use ratepayer money for. You can't use it for just anything, including some rebates. So that's what that means. We'll talk about that later, but you need to anticipate that you might have a bit of a problem or where you're going to get funding. Then go to your stakeholders, which most often is a city council or a board of directors. You need to sell that. You need to sell it first to your boss's boss, sell it to everybody you can, and then go to your stakeholders. They'll help you. Your boss will help you at the stakeholder level. Once you've done all that, you need to solicit some public involvement. That means you have to sell your program to the public. If you've done all the other steps, more than likely it's going to work out well for you and the public will be interested. And then you just got to put it into practice. You're going to come along the way and you're going to realize that you have to integrate and modify these programs. Something is going to go wrong. Don't be afraid to stop and make changes so that you can fix it. Check and see if you're actually, if you can, getting water savings along the way. You might not be getting what you thought you would. You might be getting a lot more. So you need to adjust for that. And whenever possible, work with a partner or steal a plan from a partner. Find somebody else who's done what you've done and see if they'll let you borrow their information or their forms or whatever it is that you can borrow. People in water are extremely generous. So that would be very helpful for you. And I think this is, okay, I think this is the last slide. And this is an important one. You need to talk about your program once it's started. And this is difficult to do because nobody wants to go back to a council meeting. Nobody wants to update their boss. Nobody wants to go to a board meeting. I don't either. But if they don't hear about your programs and they don't hear how they're doing and be honest, what's succeeding, what's failing, they're going to be less likely to fund you the next time. So you need to monitor it, evaluate it, and revise it, but you need to talk about it and you need to be kind of loud about it. Now, I don't mean you need to be obnoxious about it, but you do need to go and prepare something for your boss or prepare something for your board or council and show them, hopefully in pictures, and so that they can buy into it. They will be so much more likely to evaluate you and in a positive manner and give you more money and approve your programs in the future.